and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 315, and today is March 15th, 2014. And the title of this episode is The Current Economic Collapse News Brief for this Saturday. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. And what we understand that there are a lot of layoffs going on right now, and we are seeing a lot more coming. And right now, Sony has just announced that they are going to be laying off a significant amount of people coming up in the next couple of weeks. Where else are we seeing layoffs? Well, AOL is also reporting that they will be laying off a lot of people, and Computer Associates Technology is laying off around 600 additional people at this time. Now, we understand that the government, they do all the calculations, they figure out unemployment, and they always tell us that, those people that aren't in the labor force, those people are retiring, they're not looking for work anymore, and this is why they're not being counted. And we see this all over the corporate media. This is what they're doing. And actually, there was a report and a study done showing that actually this is kind of false. And right now, the labor force, the people who left the labor force, exploded again, another 535,000 people. And on February 26th, a report from the Economic Policy Institute shows the following. Since the start of the Great Recession, this is over about 6 years ago, the labor force participation has dropped significantly. Most of the drop, roughly 3/4, was due to the lack of job opportunities in the Great Recession and its aftermath. There are now 5.8 million workers who are not in the labor force, but who would be in the labor force if there were jobs. And those people who are no longer in the labor force are under 55 years old. So they're not actually retiring. These are people who are looking for work, they're not retiring, and there are just not enough jobs out there. And we know this, and I know from my friends and other people that I talk to that they continually put out resumes and they just don't get any answers back for work. And we see this happening. Now, in the real estate market, we understand that real estate is pretty much imploding. We all get this at this point. We understand that the big players, the mortgage departments, they've been laying off people. The big players, they're starting to get out. And Blackstone acquisition pace has declined 70% from its peak last year. I wonder why. And the private equity firm was spending more than $100 million a week purchasing properties, and after investing about $8 billion since April 2012 to buy about 43,000 homes in 14 cities, the company has narrowed most of its purchases to Seattle, Atlanta, Miami, Orlando, and Tampa. And really, they're trying to get out of these markets. They're scaling back, and they're saying, you know what, here, you Americans who really can't afford anything, try to buy these homes. And again, they know they can't. This is why the mortgage applications have been dropping by 60 to 66%. This is why the mortgage companies are laying off people. And again, this is why we see this happening. And again, home prices have continually gone up, and now they're becoming unaffordable for the everyday person. And of course, since the homes are too high, what they're doing is they're bringing back, as well we know, is the adjustable rate mortgages. They're bringing back 100% financing, and they're giving loans out now to subprime people so Blackstone can get these houses off of their books, because this is what they do at the top of the bubble, I should say. They try to unload as much as they possibly can. They drive the prices up, then they got to unload them, but there's just no one there to purchase them, and they realize this, and they're trying to get rid of them as quickly as they possibly can. Now, out in Afghanistan, we get it. The United States does not want to leave that country. They want to keep the troops in there because it is in a strategic location. China is there. They have a huge amount of natural resources. Copper there is there. Chinese are helping them mine it, and they are growing the poppy fields. We get this. But Karzai said on Saturday that his military is ready to take over because it already protected 93% of the country, and we're strong enough to defend Afghanistan without the assistance of the United States. And again, the United States wants Afghanistan to sign the bilateral security agreement. They do not want to. Karzai is leaving office, and again, the United States is going to wait for the next administration to come in and try to force them to sign. And you have to remember, the Chinese already said, listen, if you need help fighting terrorism in your country, we will help you, because China right now is pouring in billions of dollars into the Afghan infrastructure, and they are there just like they're there in Libya and Lebanon and in Africa. Everywhere the U.S. is, there's China. Now, yesterday I reported on that treasuries were being dumped by foreigners in a tune of about $105 billion, and they're not sure if it's Russia or China. I'm going to say it's most likely like Russia, because what we're seeing right now is Russian companies are pulling billions out of Western banks, fearful that any U.S. sanctions over the Crimea crisis could lead to an asset freeze. And what will also happen here, and as Russia continually takes the money out, they got to put it someplace, and they'll probably engage China for bilateral trade and ultimately transact using rubles or the renminbi and bypass the dollar completely in all these types of transactions. And again, the banks must be getting nervous because these companies have millions upon millions of dollars in these banks, and as they're pulling it out, again, the banks are not going to be able to survive this. If the United States does impose sanctions on Russia, this is not going to turn out well for the U.S., because we have to understand March 16th is the referendum on the Crimea, and John Kerry and President Obama, they both said if they go ahead and they go through with this, they will impose sanctions. And again, China and Russia are warning the U.S. that this could come back to haunt them, and they have to be very careful. Right now, the U.S. tried to put in a draft resolution in the UN Security Council on the Ukraine. Russia completely vetoed it, so that went down the toilet. China abstained from this, and of course the U.S. was out there saying that now Russia is isolated, alone, because they're wrong. But again, as soon as Russia vetoed it, China didn't care at this time. They didn't have to commit. They didn't have to do anything. The whole draft resolution was done. So why get involved in this? And again, China already stated that they're backing Russia. So this is a propaganda ploy. That's all that is. Now, Ukraine is beefing up, as we know, their National Guard, and they're ordering up around 60,000 emergency forces to face the Russian invasion. And again, we have to remember that the 16,000 troops that are in Crimea, they're allowed to have up to 25,000 with the Ukraine agreement. They're also having drills along the border of Ukraine of about 8,000 troops. That's why you see the tanks and all these things, because they're doing the same thing the West is doing. They're having drills in the Black Sea. They have an AWACS plane up in the air. Both sides are flexing muscles. Both sides are showing military might, and this is what they're doing. And again, one little thing, one little false flag can start this entire war off. And again, the United States, the central bankers, along with the EU, are all sitting there looking around and saying, all we have is the west of Ukraine. We want the south and the east. Even though they're out in the news saying, oh, let them have it, we don't care. Baloney. They want the entire country. They want the Black Sea. They want the strategic location because they want Ukraine on NATO. They, of course, are going to put it on the EU. They have their puppet government in place with no elections whatsoever because they don't want to hold elections because they know these people would be voted out. And again, Putin is sitting there. He's sitting back waiting for them to do something. Now, we understand, and I talked about this quite a bit, that CISPA, and we also have the UN Arms Treaty, we have the gun bill, it's all pending in the Senate. And I remember President Obama saying that if CISPA came across my desk, I completely veto it. Well, it's hard to believe because he created through executive orders, he created a framework that mimics CISPA. The only difference is that his framework is voluntary to the private corporations to hand over the private data to the government. Now, what's happening right now, because he created all these executive orders, he also created the executive orders actually to support CISPA. But there's a lot of other legislation being introduced that mimics CISPA. It's pretty much the same thing, where it will require every single company to hand over the private data and pretty much take control over the internet and what happens there. And right now, cybersecurity legislation is on deck to be revealed in the coming weeks or months. And again, they're talking about CISPA, saying, you know what, because of all these cyber attacks that we've been seeing, the ones that hit Target, Neiman Marcus, all these people's data, it is not safe, and we need some type of legislation. And all of a sudden, they're starting to mention CISPA and other cybersecurity legislation. This was completely set up to push this forward, and this is how they do it. Very incremental. They start off having all these just in a course of, 3 months, they've had all these cyber attacks with credit card information, stores being attacked, and then all of a sudden the president comes out with his framework that looks exactly like CISPA. Then, all of a sudden, Dianne Feinstein and the guy from Homeland Security introduced cyber legislation, and now they're talking about CISPA. And again, this was all completely planned because they want to get everyone's private information, and they want the companies to hand it over. Now, Iran is out there saying, and this comes out of the Iran Atomic Authority, says intelligence uncovered plot against unfinished heavy water reactor. It looks like there was a plot to do something there, and of course there was, because they want it to look like something is happening in Iran, because when they can't get into, and I say they, the central bankers, the U.S. government, Israel, Saudi Arabia, they can't get to the banks to put the natural resources of Iran on the U.S. dollar, they will use other methods to get into Iran. And we can see the buildup in Jordan and the buildup of all military assets and troops with Israel, Saudi Arabia, and other Arab nations. They're making a strike to go into Syria, and as we know, Iran and Syria have a pact. And again, this is a complete repeat of August of 2013, because their whole agenda is to remove both governments, replace them with puppet governments, and put the entire system on the private Western Central Bank and sell their resources using the U.S. dollar. And this is why this is happening. And it looks like the United States and the private Western Central countries are going to make their move, because what has happened in the last day or so, well, the U.S. issues travel alert for Russia, warns of potential military clashes, and it's a warning that all U.S. citizens located in or considering travel to the border region, specifically the regions bordering Ukraine, should be aware of the potential for escalation of tensions, military clashes, either accidental or intentional. Now, we see the same thing happening in Syria with the warnings. We saw the same thing happen in Africa with the warnings. And what do we see after that? We saw some type of incident. We saw the false flag in Syria when they had the whole warning in July going into August, with all the embassies being closed down and high alert. We saw the same thing in Sudan with the travel advisories coming out, and all of a sudden military force was going in there and they were fighting against the rebels, which was backed by the Chinese. Now, here they are. They created this entire coup and they took over the government in Ukraine. They can't get what they want, so now they are taking it to the next level. And in the next couple of weeks, this is really going to start to move forward. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.